Week 7 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 running backs. I'm ranking this week number 1, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. He's pretty much been acting as the number 1 wide receiver most games as well with all the injuries this season, with PSO in and out of the lineup, Jawan Jennings, George Kittle. I know Kendrick Bourne's had a couple big games back-to-back weeks, but this week in a matchup versus Atlanta where their run defense isn't good, I think CMC once again goes out there, has a good game, and I said it coming into the year. As long as he's healthy, he's a top 1 to 3 option weekly. Number 2, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. Bijan Robinson, he's on a tear this season, and a lot of people, it was close between him and Saquon. So if you took Bijan Robinson, what a decision it's been for fantasy owners. This guy's going out there and he's getting 150 to 200 yards per game from scrimmages, Bijan. So last week, 238 yards from scrimmage. What a ball game it was for him, obviously versus the Buffalo Bills. And this week at San Francisco, a banged up defense with no more Fred Warner out for the season. Bosa obviously has been out for the season. I think Bijan once again goes out there, has a big game. Number 3, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So Daniel Jones, he's turned this whole offense around, turned this whole franchise around, 5-1 on the season, one of the high-scoring teams in the league. And this week on the fast track in Los Angeles versus Charger defense that has problems versus the run, I think JT goes out there once again and has a big performance. Number 4, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. Josh Jacobs, when he has a favorable matchup, we've seen it already this season in back-to-back games for him. At Dallas in Week 4, went out there, put on a monster game, over 30 fantasy points. And then last week versus Cincinnati Bengals, after the bye week, went out there, put in a big game. So this week at Arizona, I expect once again Josh Jacobs, at least 100 yards and a touchdown. And this team still, to me, is more of a run-first team than a pass-happy offense in Green Bay. Number 5, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So this week, good matchup versus Tampa Bay. They can't stop anyone. Running backs have been having their way with this Tampa Bay team. But Tampa Bay, they go out there and they put a lot of points on the board. So I believe this is going to be a track meet on Monday Night Football in Detroit. And if the Gibbs coming off a mediocre game, I expect them to come back with a big one this week. Number 6, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. So Achane, the only bright spot in this offense, and pretty much the whole season for Miami. Every week, 15 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. Last week, he exploded with a big game, was Devon Achane in a matchup versus the Chargers. And this week, it's definitely a tough matchup to go in the dog pound at the Browns. They're a solid defense, obviously, but Devon Achane, he just finds ways, if it's in the passing game some weeks, or it's breaking a 50-yard run like we saw last week and putting up numbers. Number 7, Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. So Kyren Williams, he's been a solid running back once again this season, got his contract extension in training camp. Blake Corum, he obviously hasn't been a factor into his workload. And now with Puka Nacua out, I think they're going to run the football a little bit more and use Kyren Williams as a receiver out of the backfield a little bit more as well. Where last week we saw him catch the ball, wheel route down the sideline. So like I said, Kyren, he just has to add a little pass catching to his game. And he's definitely a running back that can move up the rankings as the season goes on. And this week in a good matchup in London versus Jacksonville, I expect them to have a good game. Number 8, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. So this offense is in disarray. Saquon Barkley, the numbers have been mediocre over the last few weeks here, and touchdowns have pretty much bailed his days out because his yards per game, about 60 yards per game of late, he's averaging on the ground, the Saquon Barkley. Last season, he was averaging easily over 100 yards per game on the ground for the 2,000-yard season. And this week, it's a tough matchup in Minnesota. But Saquon is too good of a talent, and this Eagle offense is too good to be in this rut. So I think this week, it wouldn't be surprising if this whole offense breaks out, even in a tough matchup in Minnesota. Number 9, Rico Dowdle of the Carolina Panthers. So Rico Dowdle, last 2 weeks, he's putting up insane numbers, obviously. 2 games in a row, over 200 yards from scrimmage. This week, another slam dunk matchup at the New York Jets that can't stop anyone. But the only thing, Chuba Hubbard is looming. And let's say Hubbard does come back in this game. They gave him a contract extension last season. They're not totally going to phase him out of the offense. Even head coach Dave Canales said that he's non-committal if Rico Dowdle is going to be the bell cow for this team when Hubbard's healthy. So that's something to keep an eye on. But I think one more week they'll keep Hubbard out. They're 2-0 without him. And Rico Dowdle, like I said, this guy's getting over 200 yards from scrimmage 2 weeks in a row. Number 10, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bucky Irvin, once again, isn't going to play. Head coach Todd Bowles said for this Tampa Bay Buc team. And this week it's a matchup in Detroit where both teams, I believe, are going to put a lot of points on the board. And this is going to be a track meet. So White one of the better receiving backs in all fantasy football and pro football, obviously. And this week at Detroit, I think he's going to work his way into volume, especially with all the injuries. Bucky Irvin out, Chris Godwin, and a book, and still Mike Evans possibly might not return as well. Number 11, Ashton Ginty of the Las Vegas Raiders. This week a tough matchup with Kansas City. Their run defense last week did a good job versus Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. But Ashton Ginty, he's been adding that receiving to his game, which obviously could take him to the next level. And he's the bell cow over there, where he's easily getting 20, 25 touches per game. And another thing with Ginty, it just takes a couple runs for him as well to have a day. 12, Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. Javonte Williams, he was bottled up. It was his worst game of the season last week at the Carolina Panthers, where it was George Pickens and Jake Ferguson making the plays for the Cowboys, even though they fell short and lost the game. But this week, I think they go back to the run a little bit more. Commanders coming in, division ball game. You know, these games are grinded out, even though I believe it will be a high-scoring game between these two teams. And Javonte Williams, I say, bounces back. 13, Quishon Junkins of the Cleveland Browns. Junkins, he got shut down last week, and it was a buzzsaw of a matchup to go into Pittsburgh as a rookie, and also Pittsburgh coming off the bye, healthy and energized in that ball game and rested. So this week, it's a great matchup versus Miami. They can't stop anyone, and we've seen the potential already at Junkins. We saw versus a good defense in London a few weeks ago in Week 5 versus the Minnesota Vikings. So this week versus Miami, I have Junkins bouncing back. 14, Bill Krosky Merritt of the Washington Commanders. So Krosky Merritt, it looks like he's the guy now totally. McNichols, Rodriguez, they didn't get much touches in that ball game on Monday Night Football. And Krosky Merritt, they like the talent, obviously. They traded away Brian Robinson in preseason and elevated Krosky Merritt, who was a 7th-round pick. So this week in a matchup at the Dallas Cowboys that can't stop anyone. We just saw Dottle go for 183 yards on the ground. I think he's in for a good game. Number 15, Cam Scatterbo of the New York Giants. Cam Scatterbo, what a rookie season it's been for him. And last week, he put to rest who's the running back in this backfield. I know Tracy returned, got some touches early in the game, and then once Scatterbo got going, and after that first touchdown, found the end zone 2 more times. I know it was goal line stampers, but still, this kid's a physical back. He's taking guys with him as he's running over defensive players, and he's not scared of the contact. And this Giant team, I think they're going to ride the wave. And this week, even in a tough matchup with Denver, the volume is going to be there, and production, I think, is going to be there. 16, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. So Breece Hall, he might be a trade candidate, someone who's gone in the next couple weeks. Well, obviously, this New York Jet team going nowhere, so obviously that will boost up his fantasy value. This week, though, it's a good matchup versus Carolina. And obviously now with Brandon Allen, who's been out the last few weeks, and he's going to be out more weeks, goal line touches are back to Breece Hall. So this week in a matchup versus Carolina, where their defense really can't stop anyone, and I think he'll get his 15, 23 touches in this one. He's a solid RB2 for Ronan. 17, J.K. Dobbins of the Denver Broncos. I know he's been a touchdown-dependent running back more weeks than not, and last week that showed, unfortunately, for Dobbins, where he only had 4 fantasy points in that game versus the New York Jets. But this week, a better matchup versus the New York Giants. Their run defense isn't all that great, and Denver's back home as well, so I think Denver a better running team at home than they are on the road. And RJ Harvey, he really hasn't been a factor in taking work from Dobbins, which is a good thing as well. 18, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. Last week it was a monster game for Swift. Had a nice 55-yard touchdown down the sidelines in the end zone. And also he had 160 yards plus from scrimmage with Swift. So he was a big part of that victory at the Commanders. And this week it's a good matchup versus the New Orleans Saints. But the thing with Swift is sometimes he'll have that big pop game, and then the next week you don't see much from him. And also as well, Kyle Monangai is starting to get some work in that backfield. So no doubt Swift came off the monster game, and it's a great matchup this week versus New Orleans. But still, he's a running back that's been inconsistent, and I have to see a little bit more out of him before he really moves up the rankings. 19, Jordan Mason of the Minnesota Vikings. Aaron Jones, he's still out at least a few more games. And Jordan Mason, we saw last season filling well for Christian McCaffrey majority of the season, and we've seen it so far this year, more games than not. Jordan Mason, he's been a bell cow and a physical running back for this Minnesota Viking team. So coming off the bye week, Philly coming in, the defense is struggling. I think Mason could go out there, have a solid ball game. 20, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So teams now, they're selling out on the run and stopping Etienne and forcing Trevor Lawrence to try to beat him over the last couple weeks. And we saw in Week 5 it didn't work with Lawrence led them back to victory versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And then last week we saw Seattle come in and beat this Jaguar team. But ETN's the bell cow. Bashal Tutin, he really hasn't done much at all this season. And obviously Tank Bigsby, they traded him away in week 2 to the Philadelphia Eagles. So ETN, he's going to get the workload this week. A decent matchup in London versus the Rams. And I expect this to be a high-scoring game. 21 Kamini Vidal of the Los Angeles Chargers. Last week was a coming-out party for Vidal. Marion Hampton, he's going to miss at least 4 or 5 more weeks with the ankle injury. And a lot of people, including myself, I thought Haskins was going to get the first crack and be the back over there for this Charger team. But Vidal quickly put that to rest. We had 18 carries, 124 rush yards, touchdown, and 3 catches, 14 yards added on. So this week in a matchup versus Indianapolis coming to town, I believe this could be a high-scoring game between these two teams. And Vidal, like I said, he looks like the guy over there, but I'm still going to temper expectations. And to me, he's a low RB2 for Ronans. 22, Jalen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Warren, he got the starting job back. Kenneth Gainwell still working in. But this week, it's a great matchup at the Cincinnati Bengals, where we just saw Josh Jacobs go out there and have a big game. And also with Aaron Rodgers at 41 years old, he's not going to throw the football 35, 40 times. That's not what Mike Tomlin and the Steelers team wants. So Jalen Warren, he's going to work his way into production this week. He's a 3-down back, and I like him this week as an RB2 for Ronans. 23, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. Last week, it was a mediocre game for David Montgomery, but this week, in a good matchup versus Tampa Bay, where, like I said, their defense really can't stop anyone. I think Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery both go out there and have solid fantasy performances. 24, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. That doesn't look like it's likely that Kamara gets traded, and he's still going to be the back over here in New Orleans. The only thing is ceiling is low. If he's not catching passes out of the backfield, he's not really doing much. And now with Taysom Hill back as well, you know, he gets his goal line packages and vultures touchdowns as Taysom Hill. And also Kendre Miller and Kamara been splitting carries. So with all those factors, he's a low-end RB2, even in a decent matchup this week at the best. 25, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Chase Brown, he's been a bust, obviously, with Joe Burrow out until December or the whole season from week 2 on. Obviously, this whole offense took a hit, and Chase Brown, the most, I think, him or T. Higgins, fantasy value totally dropped. So this week in a tough matchup versus Pittsburgh, where it's tough to run on him. We saw him last week shut down Quinshon Judkins, and I believe once again this week it's going to be tough for Chase Brown in this one. But still, there's no competition. I know P. Ryan, he'll get his 4 or 5 touches per game, but if obviously you got injuries or buys, Chase Brown, you're going to have no choice but to put in your lineup. But the ceiling to me isn't high. 26, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. It's a timeshare in the backfield over there in Seattle. And it's not really a great situation where both running backs really haven't been productive over the last couple weeks. And this week, not a great matchup. Houston coming in on Monday Night Football. They're one of the more underrated defenses, in my opinion. And the thing is, Charbonnet taking those goal line touches obviously hurts the value of Kenneth Walker as well. Where obviously I think Kenneth Walker's a better back with the home run ability and catching the football out of the backfield. But like I said, his stock is down. 27, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. So pretty much they've been using 3 backs. Pacheco starting it off, Hunt coming in short yardage goal line packages, and Brashon Smith coming in on passing downs and some third downs as well. So this week in a matchup versus Vegas, Pacheco, I still don't think the ceiling's high. Like I said, with a 3-man committee over there, even though he's the leader more weeks than not in carries in the backfield for this Chief team. 28, Woody Marks of the Houston Texans. I think Marks, his upside's still higher than Nick Chubb. A couple weeks ago he had a coming-out party, and then in a blowout victory at the Baltimore Ravens, he didn't do anything in that game as Woody Marks. So this week, tough matchup at Seattle, Monday Night Football. 12th man, you know it's going to be loud over there. And him and Nick Chubb as well, they're pretty much in a timeshare. Well, Woody Marks, he's more third down, passing downs back. And Chubb, obviously, the big bruiser in between the tackles. 29, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So this Patriot backfield, I'm not a fan of it as well. Stevenson, 1 good game, 1 bad game has been the pattern for him. Last week, he didn't do anything. I know this week a decent matchup at the Tennessee Titans. But really, to be honest, I don't want any part of this Patriot backfield. With Antonio Gibson out for the season, it did open things up a little bit to a 2-man committee, but still, these guys are tough to trust. 30, Nick Chubb of the Houston Texans. Nick Chubb, he's been a touchdown or bust type of fantasy play. Like I said, Woody Marks has looked like the better back this season. But the thing is with Nick Chubb, we know he's had some devastating knee injuries over the last couple seasons, especially last season, tearing pretty much every ligament in that knee is Nick Chubb. So obviously not 100%. Obviously lost a step. But if you need a guy to plop in the end zone and maybe get 60, 70 yards total in this game, Nick Chubb still capable of doing that. 31, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. So now with Callahan out as the head coach, it's going to be interesting to see if Pollard's going to get back to that bell cow workload where he's getting 85-90% of the touches, or Tajay Spears is going to work in like he did last week, especially on passing downs, and especially if they're going to be trailing pretty much every game this season and chasing points. We're going to see Tajay Spears in there more than Pollard, where he's more of a receiving down, passing downs back than Pollard is. But this week versus New England, this could be a close game early on, and then I think second half New England pulls away, and that's when Pollard obviously don't get touches. But like I said, with Callahan out, we'll see how these touches go in the backfield this week. 32, Bam Knight of the Arizona Cardinals. So Bam Knight, he was on the practice squad and like the fifth-string running back a few weeks ago, but obviously Connor out for the season. Also as well, Trey Benson out 4 to 6 weeks with a knee injury. Then Michael Carter and DeMercado, those guys shed a few weeks ago in that matchup versus Tennessee. Couldn't get the job done. DeMercado fumbling at the 1 yard line, letting go in the football. And then last week, Bam Knight got his opportunity, even though pretty much it was a 50-50 split where a lot of reports came out, made it like Knight was going to get 70-80% of the touches, but he had a decent ball game, over 12 fantasy points in PPR leagues. It looks like he is the short yardage and goal line back, which is a good thing as well. But this week, in a matchup versus Green Bay, I just don't think his ceiling's high. 33, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Kareem Hunt, he's been a touchdown-dependent running back, and it's a mess in that backfield as well, like I said earlier, with Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, and Brashard Smith in there. So if Kareem Hunt don't find the end zone, he pretty much hasn't had fantasy value this season. 34, Trevion Henderson of the New England Patriots. So Trevion Henderson, he was the preseason talk, especially out of the rookies. He had a big game with a kick return touchdown. He had a nice couple runs in a ball game as well and catches out of the backfield, but it hasn't translated to the regular season. And they just keep giving Ramondre Stevenson chances where he's been a fumble machine this season as well for this New England Patriot team. So this week at Tennessee, he's nothing more than a back-end option is Trevion Henderson. But let's see if someone emerges in the next few weeks between him and Stevenson as the lead guy. 35, Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. So Charbonnet getting all the short yardage, getting the goal line work, but pretty much production hasn't been there for Charbonnet. So his ceiling one's not good if he's not scoring a touchdown. And we saw it last week with only 4.70 fantasy points. He's not much of a receiver out of the backfield is Charbonnet. And hopefully in this backfield as well, there's one guy who's going to get a majority of the touches, because right now it's been a mess with Walker and Charbonnet in terms of fantasy football. And the 36th and final back I'm ranking is Tajay Spears of the Tennessee Titans. So Tajay Spears, last week, the most work he got all season. We know he missed the first 4 weeks of the season with an ankle knee injury, was Tajay Spears. And now with Callahan out as head coach, it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be the running back over there in Tennessee. But like I said, Tajay Spears, he's the passing downs, third down back. He's had that role even with Derrick Henry was there for many seasons with this Tennessee Titan team. And this week versus New England, I say it's a close game early, and then second half New England pulls away in that ball game, and that's where we might see Spears in that one in the second half. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for week 7 of the fantasy football season.